It was late at night when Andrew suddenly collapsed on the ground. A piercing headache had split his mind into pieces and made him stumble down onto the concrete path. He sat there for a while, looking down at his hands, till suddenly the pain subsided and he was able to stand. Frantically, he stumbled around trying to realize the source of his pain. Concussion? Poison? Another piercing headache attacked him, and he was again thrown to the ground. Find help, his conscience whispered to him. Panicking, Andrew stumbled down the path trying to leave the park. He remembered there was a clinic or something near here. He looked down at his phone only to find the battery was dead. He cursed himself silently as he moved onward, all the while in terrible pain. He shuffled along the dimly lit riverbank park, clutching his head. He walked for what felt like years until he saw something in the trees, a large glowing H from across the river. Beneath it was a hospital, and beneath the hospital was a large bridge leading across. Andrew was relieved, but he cursed himself again. There was no hospital or bridge anywhere near where he thought he was. He must have gotten horribly lost at some point down the trail. The pain flared again. He'd have time to belittle himself later, and so he moved across the bridge. There were no cars on the road, and no pedestrians on the sidewalk. That's normal, his conscience whispered. It is light. Still, though, it felt eerie crossing the empty bridge with nothing but a few far-apart street lamps to guide him. The world felt empty. When he crossed the middle part of the bridge, he felt faintly nauseous for a moment, then continued on. For some reason, this side of the river felt colder, and it was harder to breathe. Whatever's happening to me must be getting worse, he thought. Thankfully, though, he eventually reached the doors of the looming hospital. But now his headache was worse than ever. He walked around the side of the building, then headed forward. He went over to the ER and found that the waiting room was completely empty. That's lucky. Is that normal? He thought. Yes, it is normal, his conscience whispered. The ugly room had harsh fluorescent lights, and yet to his dismay many were broken. In fact, the entire room looked old and awful. Clearly hadn't been renovated in a while. The lurid room did little to help the pain in his head. The strange thing about the room, though, was the large front desk sitting at the very back. It was way too large and looked like it was made from different types of wood just thrown together. Above the desk there stood a huge frosted glass window where Andrew could just make out the silhouette of a person standing in wait. He walked up to the front desk and said, "Hi, I've got a splitting headache that's just come out of nowhere, and it keeps getting worse. Can you help?" The silhouette behind the desk looked down at him and slid a note underneath the window. "Head to room 103 for immediate repair," it read. Andrew looked at the figure behind the desk with a confused look, but just then another headache, worse than all the other ones, nearly knocked him down. He caught onto the desk, took the note, and started walking. Time seemed strange, the headache making each second feel like 1,000, the brutal pain extending the time it took to walk across the building. Andrew was anxious and stressed already, but what startled him as he moved down the halls was just how quiet everything was, and just how terrible the building looked. The wallpaper was peeling and the style was decades old, the ceiling panels were yellowing, and the whole place looked as though it was rotting. I must be in the old wing or something, he thought. Yes, his conscience whispered, that must be it. But then Andrew came to a part of the building where the wall had collapsed completely and the ceiling was sagging down. There was dirt and rubble everywhere. This is wrong. No, this isn't right. No, something is wrong here, his panicked mind thought. No, this is right. This is normal. You're fine. Just keep walking, his conscience whispered. It will all be over soon. And for some reason, Andrew kept walking. Clack, clack, clack. There was nothing but the sound of Andrew's feet hitting the tile floor as he shuffled through the rotting building. As he kept walking, it was as if his headache was getting worse. He could barely think. The pain was unbearable. But Andrew just kept sagging forward across half-broken tiles. But the more he progressed throughout the building, looking desperately for room 103, the more decrepit the hospital around him became. The floor and walls were stained with a horrible substance that smelled foul. Loose electric wires hung from the ceiling, and doors hung loose from collapsed rooms. The hospital was more a cave made of concrete, an abandoned place lost to time. But finally, after walking for what felt like hours, Andrew stopped in front of room 103. The wooden door was ancient, and the metal numbers hanging from it were rusting. But strangely, it was the only door in the whole hall that wasn't broken. It was unnerving. Why am I doing this? Why aren't I running? The headache was so bad he could barely see straight, yet still. This is strange. This is dangerous. What am I doing? Why aren't I running? Andrew screamed in his head. Because everything is fine, his conscience whispered. We'll all be over soon. Your headache is about to end. And then in a single second, Andrew realized the horrible truth that these weren't his thoughts. Who are you? Andrew screamed, falling backward as a horrible migraine suddenly shrieked through his skull. I am the end of pain, his conscience whispered. I am the healer. Just then, the doorknob of room 103 started to turn. A horrible noise of screeching, rusted metal. Andrew was on the floor and could do nothing but stare as the door slowly crept open and a cloud of dust was blown up in its wake. A sound like the wings of a wasp then echoed out from room 103, and slowly, a limb and a face peered out. Slowly, as if gliding, a third, a fourth, and then a fifth arm suddenly appeared, one holding a bone saw, the other two holding a vial and dirty syringe. I will heal you, his conscience whispered. For a moment, Andrew was frozen, lying on the filthy ground looking up. Then he screamed and threw a piece of rubble at the figure. The syringe shattered. Andrew ran. He dashed down the halls until he was forced into a limp. The pain forgotten for a moment was back. It was mind-numbingly awful. He could hardly see and he couldn't tell where the walls were. He was forced to stop and almost threw up. But the memory of the door and the thing behind it came back to him, and he kept on limping forward as fast as he could. He could hear the sound behind him, the sound of wasps' wings. He kept going and going, tracing his way back the way he came, avoiding the collapsed halls, till finally he got to the waiting room. His headache had become more bearable the farther he had ran, but it was getting worse again. It's getting closer. The figure behind the frosted glass window looked at him as he entered. It didn't make a sound, just tracked his movement with its head. That might be a problem, he thought, as he armed himself with a shattered piece of tile from the floor. But as he moved across the room, the thing behind the desk never made a sound, and barely moved, only turning to keep looking at Andrew. Andrew kept line of sight with it always until he reached the door at the end of the room and dashed out of the hospital. The air was cold, and his headache was getting worse. He knew it must be close. He ran to the bridge, but as he did, he noticed there was someone standing on the bridge sidewalk, right in his way. The thing was standing there, waiting for him, just a few yards ahead, wearing a black raincoat that covered up its face and arms. It was tall, but its upper body was grotesquely large compared to its legs. It's going to wait for me to run, and then it's going to kill me, Andrew thought. No matter what I do, there's no way I can get back. unless... Andrew took a step toward the creature. Then he took another step, and then another, walking up to it as calmly as he could, the searing pain in his head getting worse with every step. The thing looked at him as if intrigued and tilted its head. Andrew kept walking until the creature was just a few feet away, standing in the middle of the bridge and blocking his hope of escape. "I have a deal for you," Andrew said. "Oh," the thing spoke in his mind. "If you answer my question, I'll give something to you," Andrew said calmly. "What could you give me that I couldn't take from you myself?" The creature whispered in his mind. "Well, if you don't answer my question, you'll never know what it was," Andrew said. The creature then stared at him for a very long time. Minutes went by, and suddenly its voice in his mind said, "What is your question?" Andrew looked up for a moment at him, and said, "Do you have wings similar to a bug?" The creature looked down at him. "Yes," the voice said. "Prove it, or I won't give something to you." The creature stared for a while more. Then from the back of its raincoat, two yellowing, translucent insect wings emerged, dominating the space of the bridge. "Good," Andrew said. Then he slashed the shard of tile he had picked up across one of the wings and jumped off the bridge. Andrew swam and swam and swam, and when he resurfaced, he was on the right side of the river, the bridge looming behind him. That's how it caught up to me. It could fly, Andrew thought. What he didn't know was if it could follow him into the water. But as he swam to shore and climbed up the bank, nothing followed him. And when he looked back to see if the creature was there, he saw that the bridge and the glowing hospital sign had disappeared. The sun was beginning to rise now, and his headache was gone. And as Andrew walked up to a main road filled with cars and pedestrians, he looked down at the shard of tile he was still holding, deep in thought. "Well, you did answer my question, and I did give you something." The tile gleamed in the sunshine, and Andrew was thankful to be alive.